Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all, and a warm welcome also from my side to this webinar for the launch of Michael's book, which is called Civil Resistance Tactics in the 21st Century, and also the companion to the book, which is the impressive Nonviolent Tactics database managed by the dedicated team of Nonviolence International. Thank you to all of you for coming and making this a priority. And I would like to invite you to try and join us for the full 90 minutes if you can, because of the importance of the topic and the rich panel and audience that will have much to share and hopefully to debate. Also a reminder that this webinar is recorded and will be shared on the Nonviolence International YouTube channel. So let me say a few words about the agenda for this webinar. We will now start with the book presentation by Michael Beer. Then his colleague Annalisa Bell will present the tactics database. We will then have some remarks by Jamila Raqib, a short intervention by Barbara Wien, and then this will be followed by hopefully a vigorous discussion with all of you. As a kind reminder to all our panelists and participants, and also to myself, we have many non-native English speakers today. So let's try to be inclusive and to speak slowly and clearly. Actually, maybe those who are non-native English speakers in the audience could make yourselves known by using the thumbs up button. And then we see what a diverse crowd we have today. Let me see. Where we have quite a few non-native English speakers, including myself. Perfect. So let me now introduce our author, Michael Beer. He's the long-term director of Nonviolence International. He's been managing the organization for many years and supporting nonviolent movements and groups around the world. He's also a veteran trainer and activist who has participated in more than 1,000 nonviolent direct actions and protests for many different valuable causes. This is his first book. So congratulations, Michael, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Véronique, for that lovely introduction, and Mubarak for your lovely welcome. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. It's great to have a huge crowd here. And I'm very excited about the book and the database and what we're trying to do, and really look forward to sharing this with you and seeing how you guys, all of you, can participate in some way to making this even a long-term success. I want to thank Nonviolence International team and volunteers. A lot of people have put a lot of time into this book and database. Special thank you to David Hart, our co-director, whose commitment to nonviolence justice and tikkun olam is truly admirable and has done a lot to strengthen this organization. Mubarak deserves a great thanks for encouraging me to write this book. And he's really helped me so much in my career and helping make Nonviolence International really the center of my life's work. I want to thank my spouse, Latanja, and my kids, Keen and Sky, as well as the larger family. And my special thank you to my mother, Fran Beer, who passed away unexpectedly in March, and to my father, John Beer, who so profoundly shaped who I am and my passion for nonviolent social change. Other thank yous go to ICNC for publishing this book and sponsoring this research. ICNC's work over the last 20 years has been incredibly important to the work, to the field of nonviolent conflict, and to people all over the world. The world needs ICNC, and we look forward to working with you for years to come. Thanks to Gene Sharp, whose work has changed the world in so many lives, even on this call. I want to thank him for endorsing my effort to update his research. And finally, thanks to all of you. Many of you have supported Nonviolence International financially because this database was a volunteer effort and only funded through general funds that came in from support from you. Thank you all for attending. And many of you are leaders in nonviolent activism on this call and empowering disenfranchised people from around the world. It's an honor to spend time with you, and I look forward to hearing your thoughtful comments. The title of the book is Civil Resistance Tactics in the 21st Century. It's about 110 pages long, but there's so much more content than I could cover in today's presentation. I'll talk about why I wrote the book and some major ideas in the book. I'll end with some asks of you, since passivity is antithetical to nonviolent action. Why I wrote the book. Gene Sharp came forward with 198 methods of nonviolent action in 1973, and nobody's updated it since. I've asked lots of people to do so and nobody did, and so finally I just accepted the task to do so, and we have about 350 tactics, methods of nonviolence that we've collected so far, and there are many more to come. And then there have been just so many new tactics invented in so many creative ways and dimensions that it's not just the quantity, but the diversity and creativity of humankind that we really wanted to share with a wide audience and empower people around the world with lots and lots of new tools to use in their various conflicts that they encounter. So, civil resistance, here's the lovely book that the ICNC published. Very grateful for that. What is civil resistance? Civil resistance is basically mass nonviolent action, and the precise definition borrowed from our host Véronique Dudouet actually is in the book. Civil resistance is an extra institutional conflict waging strategy in which organized grassroots movements use various nonviolent tactics such as strikes, boycotts, demonstrations, non-cooperation, self-organizing, and you can see constructive resistance to fight perceived injustice without the threat or use of violence. And that's a very long definition, but basically it's saying, another way of saying this is it's everything that's not the courts, not elections, not legislation. And pretty much everything else is the grab bag we call mass nonviolent civil resistance. What is a nonviolent tactic? Gene Sharp said these were akin to nonviolent weapons and are the many individual forms of action, and they can be understood as discrete methods or nonviolent tools deployed to achieve a limited goal. Although the distinction between method and tactic can be useful for research and educational purposes, the word methods in English is often an obstacle to public understanding of civil resistance because tactic is widely used to mean both method and a discrete action with a goal. So I'm going to use generally the word tactic instead of method to facilitate public understanding. Two main points of the book are that we have 346 tactics of civil resistance, and many of which are new, and it's helpful to divide the universe of nonviolent tactics into constructive and confrontational tactics. It's kind of a dualistic worldview of how to use of nonviolent tactics and how they work. And this is based on 3 mechanisms of nonviolent tactics and how nonviolent tactics work. The repertoire of nonviolent tactics is enormous, and we have a huge number, and I'll just share a few here that are in the book. Surveillance comes from the French word sous, which means under, or surveillance from below, as opposed to what governments and corporations do, which is they surveil from above. One of the best examples of this is George Floyd's murder, in which we had citizens surveilling the police and the authorities on their activities and then sharing it with the world. The picture here is from Egypt during their revolution in 2011, in which people are shining their lights to reveal the helicopter above, which was flying dark. Cacerolazo, also casserole in English, was invented in 1971 by Chilean women, to the best of our knowledge, and is used around the world. Recently in Burma, it was used and still being used a lot as a means to protest the authorities and sometimes to alert the neighborhood for security reasons that the authorities are coming. And die-ins. This is a die-in from the Sackler Museum protesting the Sackler family's ties to Purdue Pharma and the opioid crisis. This is a common technique often used with different props, blood, or in this case, medicine bottles. This is divestment. It's hard to actually get a picture of divestment because it's kind of an act of omission. You're not investing in a company, withdrawing your investments in a company. That's kind of hard to get a picture of, but we have a picture here of folks in Britain protesting fossil fuels, wanting people to divest from fossil fuels companies. This is primarily a publicity kind of stunt because, generally speaking, the divestment doesn't have a particular impact on a financial level. This should not be confused with disinvestment, which is where a company withdraws its funds and its operations from a country or area. Mic check, People's Mic. This is made popular during the 2011 Occupy movement. It's kind of a human microphone to help large audiences hear what's going on. It's often a performance technique also used in a lot of smaller protests now. Critical mass cycling is started about 25 years ago, and it's a effort by cyclists to take over the roads and to do what we would call a creative intervention in which they're trying to live out the future today, sometimes called prefigurative politics. And this is where people want bicycles to be the norm and not automobiles to be, and motor vehicles to be the norm, and for our societies to move much more towards a bicycle world. So it's more than just a protest. It's trying to actually create the world we want to be in. I've divided the categories of nonviolence action similar to what Gene Sharp used to have it. Basically, what you see on the top is you see confrontational actions in one column and constructive actions in another. Down the left-hand side, you'll see the vast universe of human behavior. You can say things, you can not do things, and you can do or create things. And this is it's hard to come up with a scheme that encompasses the vast number of actions, nonviolent actions that people take in human conflict, but this is what we've come up with. And we think the dualistic confrontational constructive split is a useful one for people to think about. I think it's true that confrontational are the vast majority of nonviolent actions. It makes it look like it's equal here, but the constructive ones often can be very, very powerful and make big changes in society. Why is there so much growth and innovation in nonviolent tactics? Well, there are a number of reasons. Obviously, the internet and digital technology has had a tremendous impact. Art-based and cultural resistance. Well, let me just go. I'm sorry to go. I skipped too quickly. There are a number of reasons. One is the internet is its own ecosystem, and we have people actually protesting and doing things on the internet itself to disrupt the internet, to disrupt people's beliefs or thoughts or power dynamics. But also the internet has provided a way for a single person to do a single person protest and amplify that traditional nonviolent action to the world. And so it also is a tremendous amplification impact on nonviolent tactics. art-based and cultural resistance has been around for a long time. Gene Sharp didn't actually have a whole lot of these in his 198 methods, and we've added quite a few more. This is a picture from Sudan, where protesters had a phenomenal revolution against a brutal Islamist dictator in 2019. And were very, very disciplined in their nonviolent resistance and very clever in their unifying the country against this dictator. And they have made great progress in moving towards a democratic country. And we hope that they will be an inspiration to the Burmese and to many other people in the Arab world on moving away from dictators. So other reasons for big creative new tactics around the world is the influx of the human rights framework that came in the 1970s, where people identified themselves primarily as human rights activists more than nonviolent activists in many cases, human rights defenders. And they have worked more closely in many cases with the court system and with legislation, and in some cases elections. But there's a lot of overlap between what we call nonviolent action and kind of human rights tactics. This is a screenshot of the New Tactics in Human Rights website that has a huge database of nonviolent or human rights tactics. And there's a lot of overlap, and we definitely got some great ideas, including guerrilla lawyering, which is really an interesting a tactic that has been invented in the last 50 years. And then one of the reasons for such vast growth in nonviolent tactics is the civil resistance knowledge is spread all over the world. I have screenshots here from our Rutgers training database. We have the largest training database archives, I guess, not in the world with Rutgers. We'd welcome your help with that. Please send us your training manuals and we'll put them up. And we have educational resources from other groups, including the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict, which has just incredible resource center. Canvasopedia, the Meta Center, which is a great Gandhian center for nonviolence education. Beautiful Trouble, which is a very helpful website for activists. And Waging Nonviolence, which is a great blog on nonviolent news. There are many others as well, but in the last, in my lifetime anyway, nonviolent education has gotten all over the world and inspired so many people. Women and minorities have done, sexual gender minorities have done a lot of creative action. In recent times, of course, women have been doing nonviolent action for millennia, but have also contributed to a lot of creative new tactics and methods in recent times. This is a shot of the Mexico City minister being doused in glitter at a protest over police rape allegations. And so one of the interesting things about this book is that we really talk about the boundaries of civil resistance and where it gets a little bit complicated and gray. And not always clear what is civil resistance and what isn't. And there are controversies even among us about what might be nonviolent resistance and what might not be nonviolent resistance. Some of these include everyday resistance, psychological attack, property destruction and transformation, third-party actions, suicide, negotiation and dialogue. And you can see some of the others. So there are a variety of areas that are very interesting that we need social scientists to do more study of, and activists to engage with, to figure out which ones are appropriate and useful in civil resistance movements, and those that tend to be counterproductive or just immoral, if that's how you feel. So the goals of the book, I hope that this will inspire and promote action. I hope this will deepen scholarly understanding. I hope educators and trainers will use these resources and find them helpful, and improve strategic planning. If they have a larger toolkit, they'll be able to do more. I'll just finally say that we would really like your help getting this book into classrooms and into activists' hands. We'd like your help in growing and supporting this database of tactics. It can use a lot more support. We can use funding, we can use volunteers, we need new ideas, tactics, photographs, examples. And we have a organizational meeting on the 12th of May that we are going to have, and hopefully we can drop something in the chat room soon so people can see if they want to come and volunteer to help promote our tactics database and book. That's a very, very brief summary. It's been a great learning experience for me to do the book, and I just hope it's going to be useful for all of you. So thank you. With that, I will stop my screen share.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael, for this succinct but very rich presentation, which I'm sure has motivated all of us to read or reread the book. I'm sure there's already lots of questions that are ready to be asked, and don't hesitate to already post some of those in the chat or to wait for the moment to raise your hand a bit later on. I think we will first now turn to Annalisa Bell, who's going to introduce the tactics database. Annalisa is a former intern, a current volunteer of Nonviolence International, and a recent college graduate who's interested in the field of nonviolence and international law. She's been involved with the research and the development of the tactics database for the past 2 years. And so she's an excellent person to present to all of you a brief overview of what it looks like. So Annalisa, why don't you now unmute yourself, and over to you.
Thank you, Veronique. Hi, everyone. My name is Annalisa. As she said, I am a current volunteer for Nonviolence International, and I've been involved with the database for the past 2 years. So I'm going to give a brief overview and walkthrough of how to use the database. So I will share my screen. All right, and right now you should be viewing our website, which you can go and find at tactics.nonviolenceinternational.net. And so I first want to give a brief shout out to Scott here, who is an incredible Nonviolence International volunteer who custom built this website for us. He spent hours coding and making sure it fit all of our needs. So thank you to Scott. We wish he could be here today, but I believe he's in Portugal right now, which is pretty cool. So we have taken Michael's database and brought it to life with an incredible and interactive database. Right now, you are viewing the image view of the website, and you can, scroll through and click the website, click the picture to find more detailed information about a tactic. There are a bunch of different ways that you can filter it as well. If you scroll up here and you go to the filter, you can filter it by the 3 overarching categories that Michael described in his presentation. So for example, if you hit acts of expression, and then you can narrow it down even further, protest and appeal, medium human person, and it will pop up all of those tactics that fit under those subcategories as well. And then another way that you can use it is if you search for a tactic in the top right here, there's a magnifying glass, and you can just hit a keyword. So if I hit mock, all the tactics that include the phrase mock will pop up here. And then if you click on the tactic, it should show a detailed description, a little brief description at first of the tactic itself and a picture. And then if you scroll down, we have at least one example for every single tactic, and we're still working to get pictures for all of our tactics. But we do have at least one example, which is incredible since we have over 300 tactics. And you can learn more about the specific tactic example by clicking that link there. Another way to organize and use the database is through the categories division. So if you hit categories up here at the top, there's 2 subdivisions of the categories. So at first you have table view, which is good for kind of understanding more of the definitions and purposes of these categories and their subcategories. So again, I can hit acts of omission, coercive, which is penalty, confrontational, and then you learn more about it there. And that will give you like a brief overview of each category that Michael has provided us with. And then the other subdivision is if you go to the list view, which is right next door, and that organizes all of our tactics in terms of these hierarchical categories. So for example, if we wanted to go back to the mock awards tactic, it's under acts of expression, and then I believe it's under medium of human person, and then performance, and then you can click on that tactic and it should take you back to that page. And then let's see, the last thing I kind of want to show you, there's so many ways that you can use this database, and I know I'm just scratching the surface, but the last thing I do want to show you is how you guys can help to improve the database and give your input. So if you go to this homepage here, there is a Google form and at the bottom, and you can provide input on, you know, if we are missing any tactics that you might be aware of, any examples of tactics that we might not know of, photographs, corrections to our database, all of the important things. I interned with Nonviolence in summer of 2019, and I'm back as a volunteer now for the past few months. And it's been incredible to see how far this database has come since then. And it's because, you know, the hard work of all the volunteers and interns, and we always could use more volunteers. So if you're interested in more of the polishing work as well, please let us know. We always could use, you know, someone to help find photographs and additional examples to make this database even better. But then another way that you can help us with improving our database is, you know, giving your feedback. And we actually have a fun little interactive poll for you to answer. So if I just go to polling, we are struggling to kind of decide which self-mutilation actions should be included in the nonviolent tactics database, and we've got a couple of choices. So I'm going to share the poll now, and if you want to take, you know, 30 seconds to a minute to kind of, you know, formulate an opinion and click an answer, I can share the results, and that will help improve our database and help us come to a decision on what we should include. Let me know if you can't see the poll or if it's not launched yet. Oh, yep, the results are coming in. Thank you, guys.
Annalisa, I think there's a question in the chat. Someone asking, what is
if your
response is none to the poll?
That's a great question. If your response is none to the poll, you know, we will take that into consideration. And if you have any other suggestions, please put it in the chat. But yeah, next poll, we can definitely add in like a none of the above answer. Thank you. All right, and I will end the poll here. I'll give it 5 more seconds. Okay. All right, and you should be able to share the results. And the most popular is cutting hair, followed by tattoos, piercing. So yeah, so those are some of the examples that we can include in the database when we put self-mutilation as a tactic. We can specifically look up these examples as well and hopefully include all of them. But cutting hair seems to be a very popular one, so thank you. And I think that's it on my end. So thank you guys so much for listening. If you have any questions about the database, feel free to reach out or put them in the chat, and I will pass it back to Véronique.
Great, thanks a lot, Annalisa, and I hope you have motivated a lot of new volunteers to join the crew. So I will now turn to our discussion for today. I have the great honor to give the floor to Jamila Raqib. Jamila serves as the Executive Director of the Albert Einstein Institution, which I think is located in Boston. She joined Gene Sharp and the Albert Einstein Institute in 2002, focusing on the promotion and the distribution of writings and translations on the technique of nonviolent struggles and its potential in acute conflicts worldwide. In 2009, she collaborated with Dr. Sharp to create a new curriculum entitled Self-Liberation, a Guide for Strategic Planning for Action to End a Dictatorship or Other Oppression. I also have to say that her TED Talk on nonviolent action has received more than 1 million views, which is very impressive. So Jamila, over to you, and we look forward to your insights.
Thank you so much, Veronique, and thank you all for being here today. Thank you so much also to Michael for inviting me to join this conversation, which comes at such an incredibly important time for our shared work, especially as so many of us are sort of thinking about what this next phase of our work looks like, and how we can sort of better meet the needs of people who are seeking resources and capabilities and knowledge that can help them to conduct their struggles more effectively. So I want to use the time I have to sort of look at some of the global trends and really talk about how Michael's book connects with those trends and with those efforts to advance the field. We're in a moment of great challenge as communities around the world are facing multiple crises that I don't have to probably share with this group, but the growing authoritarianism, climate change, economic and racial inequality, just to name a few. But in the midst of all of this, we're also in a moment of opportunity for this work, because as these crises are taking place, so also are people in every country in the world organizing and fighting back in incredibly innovative and powerful ways. I think it's this global phenomenon that offers us great hope, grounds for hope, and also insight to carry our work forward. And I think it's this that Michael's book is tapping into, right? That we have so much to learn from people themselves, who are often organizing under very difficult circumstances, often against opponents that are very powerful and well-resourced, and who are themselves adapting and innovating. So it's also this understanding that I think motivated and helped fuel Gene Sharp's early foundational work, and really the creation of the original 198 methods. The idea that there's a lot that we can learn from people themselves who have been experimenting with nonviolent action for centuries. So for the past few years, for the past few months and probably years too, I've been helping organize Gene's archival material, which goes back to the 1950s. It's quite a task. And it's really in the 1950s when Gene first started collecting methods. And I recently came across the index cards and little bits of paper that he was using to kind of note down from the historical accounts he was studying. He was like noting down, you know, when he discovered a new method, which of course he was not really inventing or discovering, he was just documenting it. So Gene told me about the first time that he shared the list with people. It was 1960. He was a student at Oxford. And at this point, he had been collecting the methods for probably close to a decade. And he said that, you know, he had 32 methods documented with their definitions and their, you know, historical examples of their use. And he presented this list at a decolonization conference in Ghana called the Positive Action for Peace and Security in Africa. I also just found the pamphlets from the original conference. So he described how he presented this list and, you know, how excited people were. You know, he said that they stayed up all night discussing the list, thinking about how it applies and studying it, really amazed that there were 32 things that you could do. And of course, we know there's a lot more than 32 things that you can do. And in a way, I think Gene's, you know, 198 methods was probably out of date as soon as it was published. And I think he knew that. You know, he stopped at 200. He could have, I mean, he stopped at 198, though he could have easily rounded up to 200 at least. But I always suspected that he did that, you know, to show that the list was incomplete. And that really it was human imagination and creativity that would invite people, you know, to to add to the list, to invent new methods, and to use old methods in new ways in the midst of a constantly evolving world. So tactical innovation is nothing new. We're seeing it, though, take place in the world today at an unprecedented level for the reasons that Michael outlined in the book, such as the availability of new technology and digital organizing tools, as well as like the inclusion of a lot of the new methods that use art and music and poetry and other forms of expression and cultural resistance. So I've been, observing the spread of resources on nonviolent action for a couple of decades almost now. And I've seen how specifically the knowledge of the methods is so empowering for people because it demonstrates that there's this whole, repertoire of actions from which they can draw to conduct their struggles. And also that there's a whole world of activists and organizers that are experimenting with this stuff, right? That they don't have to reinvent the wheel, that, they're not alone, that, they can learn from other people's experimentation and not their own, which is often very costly. And also that they don't always have to go to the kind of, the go-to methods, right? Street demonstrations, which can often be risky and which are, often symbolic and on their own, which do very little to shift power that is necessary to actually succeed. So an understanding of the range of methods is also important. I think this is also what Michael's book is helping to do, is really, communicate the important it meets an important requirement for strategic planning. So it enables people to select methods that better fit their context, that better reflect their cultures, that are more consistent with the level of risk that they're willing to take and that they're prepared to take, and the repression that they have the capacity to withstand, just to name a few of the factors that need to be considered when selecting methods for a campaign or struggle. And that's what we mean by strategy, right? How can people select methods that better fit their context and that more effectively contribute to their objectives in order to raise the chances that the movement will achieve its objectives. So I also just want to point to another important area that I think Michael's book addresses, and that's the way in which nonviolent action, I think, Michael, you talked about this, how it's increasingly overlapping with traditional, approaches or other approaches, human rights law and advocacy, the guerrilla lawyering, strategic litigation that we're seeing. Obviously, we know movements don't operate in a vacuum. They're influenced by a wider ecosystem that connects to international human rights law, peace building, traditional political action, advocacy. And these movements themselves influence these systems and people and institutions. So this ecosystem approach, I think, is really important for people who are devising strategies that operate in the real world and that, actually reflect the environments in which they're going to be implemented. So, we've seen recently how exciting it is that, our field of civil resistance is, really reaching out to related fields, and how also other fields are very open to understanding how we can, collaborate in ways that can benefit the people that we're trying to reach and that can really improve all of our work. So I'll just say, before I wrap up, that something that I've been sort of alluding to, but which I think is a really important contribution of the book and the database and all the sort of efforts like it. And that's really the way in which it decentralizes, how we collect knowledge, generate it, and how we share it. Given the scale of the demand for resources and trainings and knowledge about nonviolent action in the world, and also what we know about this incredible level, community level of innovation and learning that's currently not being adequately captured, I think this is precisely what's needed, right? This decentralization is what's needed to advance and refine our understanding of what people are doing globally, what's working, what's not working, and how we can better share that knowledge with people who can benefit from it. And I think it's this approach that's going to allow us to better really harness the wisdom we know is in our communities and better capture the learning and innovations that we know are taking place in our world today. So there's a lot at stake here. We all know that, because ultimately, I think what resources like this and do is really foster hope, which I think we so desperately need, and without which nothing, none of this is possible. And that hope comes from knowing, what's been achieved and what's being achieved around the world through people's bravery and creativity, and that's all very empowering. I think it helps spark people's imagination, and gives them insight that can help overcome their helplessness and enable to both, fight oppression, but also build the kind of societies that better reflect the values in their communities. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamila, for highlighting both the roots behind the original database and typology that Jean Sharp had put together in the 70s, but also for highlighting the constant tactical innovation that has gone on since then. The importance of looking at the ecosystem around the use of tactics, but also the importance of sharing resources, as you've said at the end. So thanks a lot. I hope you can stay with us also for the discussion and also respond to some of the questions from the audience. But before doing that, I will turn to one more discussion for today, who is Barbara Wien, who's a professor in peace and conflict studies at the American University, who would like to make some short remarks about how we can use that work, the database in the book. Barbara has worked to end human rights abuses, violence, war, and ecological destruction since the early 80s. And among other things, she's worked to establish 280 programs in the study of peace and conflict resolution, which is very impressive. We're very happy to have you, Barbara, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes. Wow. Jamila and Annalisa and Veronique and Michael, this is very powerful. A huge shout out to Annalisa for the database. I saw it when it was originally just Excel spreadsheets. And David Hart, you've been so amazing in crafting all this. And every time Jamila opens her mouth, jewels come out. I just could listen to you for hours. Please, I need to get the recording of this session today. Because I've worked with so many peace studies programs and I've taken over Mubarak Awad's course at American University, I stand on the shoulders of giants here with Mubarak. In my class on nonviolent struggle in theory and practice this fall, I will be adopting Michael's course, book and database. But I'll also be promoting it to all the justice and peace studies programs across the United States and Canada, of which we now have 500 programs in the study of peace and nonviolence. So those of you who are interested in further marketing the book and promoting the book, we will have a meeting next Wednesday at 10 o'clock, and I'll put in the chat box the link to get into that meeting, so you can all join us to brainstorm and problem solve how to get the book an even wider distribution. So that is going to be a powerful session, a strategy session on marketing and communications. I do want to challenge Michael, just a friendly amendment, if I might, on the question of divestment, because I was so heavily involved in trying to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. We were able to move, I should say the indigenous people of this continent were able to move about $42 million out of the banks and pension funds invested in the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline. And so we did bring tremendous pressures on those that were financing it. As you know, and as Jamila said, this didn't operate in isolation. We have tied up the gas and oil pipelines in the courts as well, and bringing huge lawsuits. But we were able to document moving about $42 million out of institutions that were underpinning or financing the pipeline, and municipal governments and pension funds were a huge part of that. It is difficult to capture through photographs. You're absolutely right. But shareholders' resolutions, where we took over shareholders' meetings, are also a valuable opportunity for us to dramatize divestment. So thank you for my few remarks. And it's such a joy and honor to be on this call with all of you. I see we have 71 people. That's so impressive. So thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Barbara, for sharing your enthusiasm about the book and about this session, which I definitely share as well. I think you have to go into a meeting now and you cannot stay with us, but thanks for coming. And I hope you have raised interest among many new volunteers, especially among the trainers, educators, and teachers among us to use the resources. So we are now coming into the second part of this webinar, which is the Q&A session. And I see that there's already quite a number of questions in the chat. You can either ask your questions in the chat if you are too shy or if your technique does not allow you to speak, but I would also love to have some of you actually come and ask your question directly. And you can also do that by raising your hand. You'll find the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen. So because we are intending to have an inclusive meeting, I think there's a tradition at of Nonviolence International to first make space and voice for the young people among us. So I would like to encourage those of you who self-identify as youth to make yourself known, maybe by writing me into the chat, and I will give you priority and I will give you first the floor to make your comment or to ask your question. Who would like to start? Okay, we have Sam. Sam, would you like to unmute yourself and make your comment or ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. So I guess this question is just for Michael, especially, but anyone who wants to answer. Michael, you've discussed in your book some ways that activism has taken shape in the modern age, such as through creative artistic tactics or through the use of internet and social media. But do you actually see, on the other hand, any new recent challenges to the use or spread of nonviolent tactics in the modern era, such as through, I don't know, internet censorship or the spread of hate online? Just sort of thinking about the ways in which this new landscape of internet and social media also presents challenges to nonviolence.
Oh, that's a great question. And I'm sure there are a lot of people on this call that will have little pieces of answers to this. And clearly, these digital technologies have provided governments and corporations enormous surveillance and other kinds of power, repressive tools at their disposal. And we're seeing really titanic battles between civilians and authoritarian governments around the world, and consumers and corporations. And so, yes, indeed, I think it's a complicated story where there are more repressive capabilities. In addition to digital technologies, we also have governments and authorities around the world who have all kinds of new repressive technologies to use in the streets, whether it's different kinds of chemicals, different kinds of sound, or electricity, or this ray and that ray kind of things, and to repress popular protest. So I think that that's one arena. The other arena is the fact that, yes, we've spread knowledge about nonviolent struggle around the world to a great degree. We've also spread this knowledge to authoritarian regimes and others. And so we have regimes like the Russian government, which is extremely scared, and rightly so, of nonviolent movements, and rushes to stamp any semblance of any kind of protest movement out as soon as it can, because it sees the power and understands the importance of uh, nonviolent struggle and the key issue of mobilizing at least 3.5% of a population in a sustained way, leading to, in many cases, a great deal of success. And so the opponents are also learning this information as well and counteracting it. Those are some at least brief responses. I'm sure there are many other additional responses that we could have in the audience today about how there are more hurdles and barriers by regimes and authoritarians and others. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Michael. Jamila, you'll just let me know whenever you want to come in, and I'll take maybe the next hand from Andrea, followed by Timian, and then I will go into the chat conversation.
Thank you very much. This question came up when Michael was talking, but I would appreciate if any of you would answer with your experience. I've been working on non-violence issues for a long time, and sometimes I see that the civil society is just not as strategic or well organized, and I think we need to help them develop their capacities. I've been doing training and trying to invest a little on leadership for these organizations. But I guess I'm just trying to figure out what you think in your experience is best as an educational framework or inspiration or something that can help us as people working with the organizations to let them know that this is an option and that sometimes this can lead to better results than, you know, violent means that are not sustainable, and you know it ends up not being the most constructive approach. So I would love to hear from you. Thank you very much.
I have two responses quickly, and maybe others will have some things. I alluded to it just a moment ago, and that is that has been very important research by Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan that was supported by ICNC and others that shows that maximizing participation is really a key variable that shows success. And sometimes when we work with particularly young men, but various kinds of groups, they're not particularly into nonviolence or whatever that framework, but they potentially can be reached with a strategic understanding of the importance of maximizing participation. And if we can have the maximizing participation be a key kind of goal, that because we know that is likely to lead to success more than armed struggle, then it might encourage people to say, well, maybe rock throwing is not a good idea because this prevents older people from coming out, many women from coming out, many children from coming out. And if our goal is to maximize participation, then maybe those advantages that particularly young men have with their upper body strength to use violence is something that is not going to maximize participation. And so I think that is a framework that is a relatively new framework that might be useful in mobilizing some communities in a strategic way to apply nonviolent struggle. I would just say that another framework that I alluded to earlier that has had a dramatic impact in the last number of decades is the human rights defender framework. There are a lot of folks in the world that see themselves as human rights defenders and will use the framework of international law, international humanitarian law, International Declaration for Human Rights as a framework for organizing. And that is a framework that is a powerful one that has a slightly different strategic approach, but does provide people something beyond just, well, this feels right, I want revenge, or I want to get back at this, or it helps people think in a more strategic way if they have a framework such as a human rights framework to operate from. Those are two answers. I hope that's helpful.
Great, thanks for those answers, Michael. Jamila, would you like to come in?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say a couple of words because, Andre, I think you touch upon something so important. And I think, as we look on a world that gives us so much grounds for hope, as we're seeing this engagement like never before, people connected as never before, I think we have to remember that, that everything's going to be okay is not inevitable. We're seeing major gaps in the infrastructure of resources that are available to people, that means that they're not, that they're basically involved in these kind of ad hoc movements against these very powerful and sophisticated movements and are increasingly ill prepared. I mean, we know we're seeing a world where, people recognize that they have to do something. They're incredibly brave. They're very creative. But now, we've known for a long time there are requirements for effectiveness in applying nonviolent action. And we have some ways to go to providing resources that can help people to do that. I think right now, the big need is in terms of, how to kind of not just foster those particular skills, but also enable people to work together effectively, especially in cases where they're taking risky action. Because we know trainings do more than just impart skills, and educational resources should do more than just impart skills, right? They should also kind of figure out how to foster trust among people and how to kind of develop processes for working together and for developing strategy. So I think education, there's a lot to be very excited about in terms of all of the new research, in terms of all of the new engagement we're seeing. But I think what's needed now is to figure out how to really facilitate the process of learning for activists. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there. I think decentralizing the training process by giving people the tools to maybe conduct their own local level trainings is one way to do that. And for that, I think we need to advance the educational material to do that.
Excellent. As a researcher, I couldn't agree more. I think there's now a lot of research evidence of the strategic superiority of nonviolent action, but indeed, in order to convince activists to go for those methods and to use them, we need to translate that knowledge into educational training material. And I love your ideas of decentralizing training and allowing local activists to become trainers themselves and to inspire others. Thanks, Jamila. I will turn to Timian as on actually my own colleague from Berlin, Timian, as our next participant wanting to ask a question or make a comment.
Yeah, good morning and good afternoon, evening to all of you, and thanks for the presentation, and also congratulations for the amazing book and the database. And I'm looking forward to spending hours in looking at it and also looking at the variety of tactics that are in there. But then comes my question: how would you recommend trainers or facilitators, but also activists themselves, to actually use it? Because it can be maybe a little bit overwhelming to have so many different tactics and basically a paper of 110 pages and then a website with so many different functions. It's greatly organized, but how would you recommend for individuals, but also movements, to actually practically engage with it and use it? Thanks.
Tim, thank you very much. That's a great a question that we actually would welcome input from many of you on. The categorizations that Gene Sharp originally came up with and that we've tweaked a little bit, we believe are helpful tools for people to digest the enormous range of human activity here. So we think that the charts and the categories of action can be helpful, and so that's one suggestion. The other suggestion is for people to read certain chapters of the book, particularly around some of these gray, controversial or challenging or complicated areas that are on the margins of civil resistance, to learn more in terms of recent scholarship and action from citizens about everyday resistance and how that might be either paired with this nonviolent campaign or at least understood. So, for example, so that there are some useful short presentations of the kind of ecosystems of civil resistance that might be useful for trainers, that focus on a particular area that might be useful for trainees and trainers and educators. I would also say, and I didn't emphasize this enough in my presentation, that we have come up with what we think are 3 mechanisms for nonviolent tactics, how they actually operate. This is not to be confused with mechanisms of change, which is also referred to as what the opponents do to change in a nonviolent conflict. I'm talking about how nonviolent tactics actually function. And there seem to be 3 major kind of functions or mechanisms. One is controlling resources, which is the left-hand column of the chart that we have, manipulating or controlling resources. And you can do that through saying, through not doing, and through doing and creating. And the other 2 mechanisms are mechanisms of reward and appeal and persuasion, which are constructive in their approach. And the confrontational side would be threat and penalty. So with these understanding of these 3 mechanisms by which all tactics work, it might be very useful, I think, for trainers going forward in terms of explaining to people how to think more strategically in their actions. I would just finally say that there is a laundry list in my book. It's very, very quick laundry list of many, many things, and it's not exhaustive, but many, many things that in order to do a single tactic well, like scouting, like certain kinds of planning, like communications and all kinds of things. There are many, many activities that need to be done well in order just to do a tactic well. And that we need to educate people in how to do a tactic really, really well. And to do a tactic well is actually can take years and years of training. So we outline at least some of what might be included to actually do a single tactic effectively. I hope that's the beginnings of a help on answering your question.
Great, thanks, Michael. Can I ask a follow-up question to you or anyone else at Nonviolence International or in the audience? Have you started using this typology and this huge list of tactics for training or strategic advice purposes? And what have you found? So have you found that helpful? What are the kind of questions or reflections that came to you while trying to do so? Michael, or anyone else would like to answer that?
Yes, one of the interesting things that's come up is this category of refraining that's kind of emerged by doing a dualistic typology that we've present here. And the refraining category is really a whole category of a small number of actions, halting or suspension of activities that are kind of a unilateral action reward done to an opponent, which isn't very common, but we actually have now found examples of them. Gandhi did this in the 1890s when he called off a train strike as a unilateral gift to the British authorities. It's an interesting story. You should go read it. And then I heard it recently in a I think it was a SEPTA strike, maybe in Philadelphia, which is the commuter train strike, where the workers went on strike in the rush hour in the evening, and everybody was really terrified about what was going to happen in the next morning when everything shut down. And the union unilaterally called off its strike and said, we don't want to inconvenience people. We're happy to go back to the negotiation table and see if we can work something out, if the authorities will really work with us. And they then went forward and did negotiate a contract. But this suspending of a tactic, which is kind of not doing something that an opponent doesn't want you to do, is a kind of a new area that we really need a PhD thesis around to look at this arena. And we think that this is going to be a useful, I've heard at least one author talk about how they've now needed to incorporate this into their work that they hadn't done before. So I'm hoping that will add to the toolkit that trainers and educators have in talking about the variety of things that can be done in a nonviolent struggle.
Great. I hope you've inspired a new PhD thesis then on this. I suggest that maybe we go to the chat before going back to the raised hands. There was a question very early on from Jim about nonviolent sanctions and the controversies around that, also with an example of the BDS in Palestine. I don't know if Jim is still with us and would like to ask that question directly.
Sure. Hi, Michael. Great to see you again. And really, from Berkeley, thank you for your support and Center for Jewish Nonviolence. So, yeah, sanctions. It's kind of with the way they've been weaponized and so painfully used against people. Iran, Venezuela come to mind in particular. Maybe North Korea. And yet it's still very important in the BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions around Palestine. And how do we help our movements differentiate and combat the negativity that sanctions are having these days, the deadly sanctions? And is there discussion about that? Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. Is that a question that Jamila, you'd like to also pick up on, or Michael, would you like to go first? Thanks, Jim.
I'm happy to answer and would love to hear if Jamila had one too. That's a great question, everybody. Look, when you're doing nonviolent struggle or any kind of struggle, or you're even in your personal life, there are two questions you should ask yourself. Is this the right thing to do? And is this an effective thing to do? And that can be heavily dependent upon context. And so something that can be in one context a right thing to do is not a right thing to do in another. Right meaning in some cases nonviolent, or in some cases just morally, ethically right, however you want to define that. With regards to sanctions, there are situations in which it might be a right thing to do, in which it's not really going to be harming somebody to a great degree. For example, BDS, where sanctions against Israel are not likely to cause severe harm and bodily injury and great suffering to the Israeli country. But there can be arguments to say that, well, maybe some of the boycotts with regards to the third world status of the people of Palestinians in Israel, or the right of return, maybe those aren't strategically a smart thing to do, not an effective thing to do, but they're perhaps a right thing to do. I think there are many cases such as Iran and such as Venezuela, where it can be argued that these are not perhaps a right thing to do because they cause such enormous human suffering, or they're not done in the right way. And in some cases, they can also be argued that they're not effective. I would say in terms of international sanctions by governments, the two ones traditionally that have gotten the most support are those in which South Africa and Burma, because in those cases you had a clear direction from the majority of the people, the ANC in one case, and then the National League for Democracy group in another, which won the massive overwhelming elections in 1990. You actually had them calling on the international community to do a sanction on their own country, and so that they had the moral authority to speak for the vast majority of people for those countries. And so it's in those cases where it's more, in my opinion, more clear from an ethical standpoint that these sanctions are warranted, particularly very broad sweeping sanctions. So I don't know if I quickly answered your question the way you wanted to, Jim, but thank you for raising that very important question.
There's some interesting comments in the chat around sanctions and BDS. Going back up the chat, there was also an earlier question about the title. Maybe I'll collect 2 or 3 questions as we're coming near the end, and then you just decide which one you want to answer, and then we'll have to conclude. There was one question about the title of the book. Why did you choose to call it Civil Resistance versus Nonviolent Action? There was also now at the very end a question around, is there anything in the book about knowing when to move from political interaction or negotiation into nonviolent tactics, which is an interesting question. And myself, I'm very interested in the reverse transition from nonviolent action to negotiation. But do you have something that helps activists decide when it's time to stop negotiating and to go for extra institutional nonviolent action? So that's another one. And maybe I'll ask, because we'll have to finish the round, I'll ask Salka and then Rick to come in. And then Michael and Jamila, you can have a concluding round, maybe. Salka, would you like to come in?
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Hello. Hi. You hear me? Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Michael, and I'm glad that finally we saw you again afterward. Thank you for a magnificent book, and I look forward to implement some of the tactics that it can suit the Sahrawi struggle. You probably have been following the information. We were hoping for the new administration to fix the drama with the Trump, but it didn't. I know that earlier you mentioned some tactics of the non-violence. I remember that the Gdei the tents, building the tents and protesting as a tent in the Sahrawi method, or the first step of the Arab Spring in 2010. But I think one of the things that I like to see it to be taught or to be included as a method, it's more, visual, which is I learned in my struggle for the Western Sahara non-violence movement. I think the visual specifically in the United States, visual for people are more or they can get attention better. My other one is for example, for the I had so many for example, if for embargoes or for the BDS against the Israeli products, is it possible to use also like a campaign of similar, but not necessarily for the only for the Israelis boycotting, but rather every other government or every other nations that might use the same methods against their own people. It doesn't have to be Palestine or the Iran or Western Sahara or whatever. But is it possible to have it used? My last statement, or just a question: have you thought about using technology or some algorithm to support minorities to be heard on social media? Because this is the biggest problem that a lot of minority groups they face, like a huge, workers for governments, for dictatorships. They unleash them online, and you really will become like no one can hear what's the problem. And this is the issue we have. Do you have any algorithm, anything that will support those minorities to campaign online, virtually?
Great. Many thanks, Solka, for your questions. I'm going to have to be very unfair now and ask Rick maybe to ask a last question in one sentence, and then I'll ask Jamila and Michael to maybe give us a 1-minute selected answer before we have to close this session. Rick, over to you.
Sure thing. Thank you, everybody. One sentence. So I've been researching the work of nonviolence organizations and groups that actually are not necessarily activist organizations, but like peace teams that actually interact with activist organizations, as well as police or counter-protesters try to de-escalate situations. In the work that has been done here, what would you say to those organizations that are not necessarily activist organizations, but trying to de-escalate and trying to help maintain the nonviolent discipline of those organizations in a world and an environment that's really calling for inviting violence in many ways? What have you seen? What would you say to those kinds of organizations trying to act sort of in the middle of that crock pot of conflict?
Great. That's something that I found myself really interesting in the book, is also the array of techniques of nonviolent de-escalation that are introduced. But yeah, maybe I'll go to Jamila and give you 1 minute to pick any of those questions and to make some concluding comments.
Yeah, thank you. And I think there was a lot there. I think just in terms of the last question, I think it's something that we have seen since the racial justice protests here in the US, that this is a very common challenge throughout the world, especially as you see these moments of great mobilization, and there's a real danger there. You know, again, I'm going to go to my go-to, which is that education is extremely important, that an infrastructure in place to, you know, to have ready, you know, material to kind of inoculate the public, to prepare people for action, to prepare them for ways that can really raise their effectiveness by keeping nonviolent discipline, since that is such an important factor in effectiveness. So I think, you know, we saw here in the US how, you know, trainings were, there was a massive demand for trainings, you know, around the racial justice process, but also later on in the kind of run up to the elections and in the months after. And we just didn't have the capacity to respond effectively, which meant that, you know, as you're seeing this moment of mobilization, you know, we're also finding that, you know, maybe people were preparing to take action or taking action maybe without some of the skills needed to do it effectively. So again, I think this is something we can think about. We always need these resources. We need them everywhere in the world. We're seeing the need for them in places like Myanmar today. And I think it's amazing how a lot of the material really carries over quite well and translates really well, you know, across cultures and across contexts. I guess I would just sorry, I think I went over my minute. I'll just say that, you know, I think the methods and selecting methods always needs to be understood in the context. I think we've said that in a number of different ways, that understanding that there are these range of methods, you know, understanding how individual methods work and what circumstances should they be applied is important, right? But then also, how do we combine methods and how do we sequence them? And for that, I think we need a very deep understanding of our own societies, and also, again, how methods operate together as part of a strategy for a campaign or a struggle. So all of this material, I think, needs to be viewed in that way, as really kind of supplementing other works, and we can figure out, you know, clearly Michael's book is a huge contribution in that direction, but it can also be greatly enhanced by being used in addition to other materials. And our goal at this point is just to, you know, advance all of this stuff, yeah, to better make it available for people. So obviously access is important. All right, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jamila, for your words of wisdom and for being with us today. Apologies, Michael, I've been a bad timekeeper. We have 1 minute to go, and I'll give you yeah, the impossible task of giving us a wrap up in 1 minute.
Thank you, everybody. It's been amazing to be on this discussion with you all. A lot of your questions have been strategic questions, and my book doesn't really spend much time on nonviolent strategy. There are an enormous number of books out there. This book is fairly unique because it really focuses on tactics. And I think it's education that we've failed to do and failed to do well as educators and trainers. And I would really want to encourage everybody to drill down and look at nonviolent tactics as a fundamental area and building block on which we can do additional nonviolent education and bring in strategic issues on top of this foundation of nonviolent tactics. So it's a great exploration. We're just at the beginning of understanding nonviolent action, and I would invite all of you not just to be spectators, but be activists and join us to build this database, to build more examples, to be creative, to have these discussions, and help us get this knowledge around the world in how to engage in nonviolent tactics in effective ways and the range of tools that are available to you.
Excellent, thanks a lot. I would have had myself a lot to say on why I find this resource so amazing. And I think the richness of the discussion has shown that this book has used not only for activists themselves, but also for educators, trainers, and researchers. And from my side, many thanks to all of you for this lively discussion. And I look forward to seeing how this resource will be further used and how the volunteers will now be queuing to help you spread the word about this resource and use it themselves. Thanks a lot.